I'ma tell y'all this. That Yo Gotti, say your prayers. You better say your prayers.
You know they coming, don't you? You know they finna show
up. Bro, that got up there and said, they said, didn't CMG pay for your attorney $50,000? Yeah.
Yo Gotti built one of the most powerful empires in independent hip-hop history, turning the Memphis streets into a billion-dollar blueprint while managing to stay untouched for 2 decades as bodies dropped all around him. But right now in 2026, the walls are closing in tighter than ever. The murder case surrounding young Dolph has officially been closed, with every shooter sentenced and every cooperator dealt with. What came out in those courtrooms has placed Gotti's name right in the middle of a federal conversation that nobody in his circle can ignore. This isn't just street gossip, either. Wack 100, one of the most connected and feared figures in the entire industry, went public on Clubhouse and told Yo Gotti directly to say his prayers because the feds are coming. When a man like Wack 100 goes on record with a statement like that, you don't just dismiss it as internet noise, you pay attention. Today, we're breaking down exactly why those words carry so much weight. See, behind CMG, behind the label deals, the roster, and the revenue, lies a trail of violence stretching back years. This trail has now been fully documented in open court by cooperating witnesses under oath, with federal investigators watching every single word. What used to be street rumors is now sworn testimony, and by the time we're done today, you're going to understand exactly why Wack 100 isn't the only one bringing up Gotti's name right now. What's good, fam? Welcome back. If you're new here, this is where we break down the real stories behind the culture. No fluff, no cap, just the facts laid out exactly how they happened. Today, we are going all the way in on one of the most dangerous and consequential beefs in hip-hop history. We're talking Yo Gotti, the complete timeline of violence surrounding young Dolph, the revelations made under oath in those Memphis courtrooms, what Wack 100 said and why it matters, and what the federal landscape looks like right now for CMG. This story is layered, detailed, and goes incredibly deep, so stay locked in because it doesn't start where most people think it does. Now, before we dive in, let me keep it 100 with y'all. There has been a mountain of misinformation floating around about this entire situation. Partial stories, wrong timelines, and things being taken completely out of context have been everywhere. What we're doing today is different. We're going chronological, we're going factual, and we're connecting every single verified dot. By the end of this video, you'll have a clearer picture of the situation than 90% of the people talking about it online. This story doesn't begin with young Dolph's death. It begins years before that in the streets of Memphis, where 2 completely different visions of power were always on a collision course. Yo Gotti, born Mario Mims, came up in Ridgeway, North Memphis. He wasn't just rapping about the street life. He was actively operating in it while simultaneously building a music career that would eventually become CMG, Collective Music Group. What made Gotti exceptional wasn't just his music. It was his ability to maintain distance between himself and the chaos around him while remaining connected enough to command absolute respect. Calculated, patient, and strategic, that has been his entire operating principle for over 2 decades. Young Dolph, born Adolph Thornton Jr., came from South Memphis, specifically Castalia Street. From day one, Dolph operated on a completely different frequency than everyone else. He built Paper Route Empire entirely independently. No major label cosign, and no powerful industry figure holding leverage over him in exchange for a deal. He was generating millions in revenue while turning down opportunities that would have made most artists bow down and be grateful. That fierce independence was his identity. It's what the streets loved about him, and according to everything that has since been proven in a court of law, it's also what made him a target. So check it. February 26, 2017. Young Dolph is in Charlotte, North Carolina, in town for the CIAA tournament weekend, one of the biggest events on the Black college sports calendar. Around 6:30 in the evening near the intersection of 8th and North Caldwell Street, a vehicle pulls up alongside Dolph's SUV and opens fire. And when I say opens fire, I need y'all to actually stop and process the sheer scale of what happened. Over 100 rounds were fired at that vehicle. 100 shots. The SUV was armored with bulletproof panels, and that armor is literally the only reason young Dolph walked away from that street. His truck looked like it had been through a literal war zone, yet he stepped out of it completely uninjured. And you want to know what he did that very night, right after someone tried to take his life with 100 bullets? He went right ahead and performed his scheduled show at Charlotte's Cameo nightclub like absolutely nothing had happened. That is the exact kind of person Dolph was. Now, 3 people were eventually arrested in connection with that Charlotte shooting. Sammy Benson, better known as Black Youngsta, along with Frederick Black and Antavius Gardner. While charges against them were later dropped due to insufficient direct evidence, the connection to the broader beef was already reverberating through the entire industry, and especially across Memphis. The tension between Dolph and Gotti's camp had been building steadily, deeply rooted in Dolph's outright refusal to fall in line with the established power structure that Gotti represented in the city. Dolph had publicly called Gotti out, he wasn't subtle about it, and those words clearly had consequences. But here is where things get real. Dolph's response to surviving 100 bullets wasn't to go into hiding or reach out to make peace. Instead, he made music about it, loud, defiant, in-your-face music. He dropped 100 Shots, which became one of the most referenced tracks in Memphis hip-hop history. The title itself was the message, 100 shots, 100 shots, how you miss a whole 100 shots. That was a direct taunt. It was a man telling whoever was responsible that not only had they failed, but that he wasn't scared, he wasn't rattled, and he wasn't going anywhere. He also dropped In Charlotte and Bulletproof, putting them all on an album he literally titled Bulletproof. Naming an entire project after his survival was Dolph in his absolute purest form. This is also where the situation got even deeper. The Charlotte shooting didn't cool things down at all. If anything, Dolph surviving and then releasing triumphant music about it kept the temperature rising. In the world these men operated in, someone trying to kill you, failing, and then you making money while clowning them publicly for it is not something that just gets left alone. Later that same year, in September 2017, young Dolph was shot again, this time in Hollywood, Los Angeles, right outside a hotel. According to LAPD officials at the time, the shooting occurred after a confrontation escalated. Dolph was knocked to the ground before one of the suspects pulled out a handgun and opened fire on him. He managed to run into a nearby store, was rushed to the hospital, and underwent surgery. He survived yet again, marking 2 separate attempts on his life in the exact same year, across 2 different states. Now, here's the part that complicates the simple narrative, and I want y'all to pay close attention because this speaks directly to who Dolph was and how he moved. There were back-channel conversations happening during this period about potential peace between Dolph and Gotti's camp. People close to both sides have spoken about this, and Hernandez Govan, who was later charged as the alleged mastermind and middleman in Dolph's murder, was one of the individuals who discussed these dynamics. According to accounts tied to Govan, Yo Gotti was open to the idea of ending the conflict, and there were apparently efforts through mutual connections to broker some kind of resolution. However, according to those same accounts, young Dolph wasn't interested. When you really sit with that from Dolph's perspective, it makes complete sense. How do you shake hands with people you believe sent 100 bullets at your vehicle and then sent shooters at you in LA? What does peace even mean in that context? Dolph's position was clear. He wasn't hiding, he wasn't negotiating, and he wasn't going to pretend that certain lines hadn't already been crossed. That stance, that unbreakable refusal to capitulate to anyone, is exactly what made young Dolph a legend in Memphis and beyond. Tragically, it is also what kept a target on his back. Now, let's talk about November 17, 2021, because this is where everything becomes permanent. This is where the story stops being about survival. Young Dolph walked into Makeda's homemade butter cookies on Airways Boulevard in Memphis. He was there for the annual Thanksgiving giveaway he did for the community, something he was famous for, and something that showed exactly the kind of man he was outside of the music. He was just picking up cookies with no large security presence and no entourage, just a man in his own city, supporting a black-owned business. 2 men pulled up in a white Mercedes, Justin Johnson and Cornelius Smith. Both were armed with handguns modified with switches to fire automatically. They got out and opened fire on young Dolph right there in front of that cookie shop. Adolph Thornton Jr. was pronounced dead at the scene. He was only 36 years old, leaving behind his fiancée, 2 children, and a Memphis community that loved him with a depth that most artists never experience in their entire careers. The grief was immediate, and it was overwhelming. The city shut down emotionally because people had watched this man survive the unsurvivable twice before. And then, on a regular afternoon during the holiday season, he was gone. No armor was thick enough this time. They got him. The investigation moved fast, and what came out in those courtrooms over the following years changed everything. Justin Johnson, known as Straight Drop, was eventually caught in Indiana after a manhunt and brought back to Memphis. Cornelius Smith was arrested separately. When this case went to trial in September 2024, the proceedings rocked the entire hip-hop world. Cornelius Smith took the stand and confessed under oath, identifying himself as the first gunman to fire at young Dolph. He said he didn't even know Dolph personally, telling the court, "I felt stupid. I knew I messed up." And then he said something that connected this murder directly to the power structure surrounding Yo Gotti. Smith testified that he and Justin Johnson were executing a hit put out by Big Juke, Anthony Mims, Yo Gotti's older brother. It didn't stop there. The prosecution alleged in opening arguments that Big Juke had placed a $100,000 bounty on young Dolph's head. They also revealed that someone from CMG allegedly paid $50,000 in attorney fees for Cornelius Smith. Smith himself acknowledged this in court, stating he didn't know exactly who from CMG sent the money and that he didn't receive it directly in his hand. But the allegation that Gotti's label was financing legal representation for one of Dolph's admitted killers is explosive. That's the exact kind of detail federal prosecutors build entire RICO cases around. Justin Johnson was found guilty on all counts in September 2024, first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and being a convicted felon in possession of a handgun, receiving a life sentence plus an additional 35 years. Big Juke himself never faced charges in this case. He was shot and killed outside a Memphis restaurant in January 2024 before the trial concluded. He died as a suspect who, according to retired Sergeant Terrence Dabney, who led the murder investigation, was never even questioned by Memphis police. His own attorney highlighted on the stand that the Memphis Police Department never followed up with Big Juke at any point in the investigation, even though he lived for another 2.5 years after the crime. That exchange alone tells you everything about how this investigation was handled at the local level. Hernandez Govan, who was accused of being the middleman who orchestrated the hit for a $10,000 cut, went to trial in August 2025 and was acquitted of all charges. That verdict was hard for a lot of people to accept, but the jury spoke, and that's simply how the system works. Then, on May 15, 2026, Cornelius Smith, the last remaining defendant, accepted a plea deal in a Memphis courtroom. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The DA confirmed that Smith would not be eligible for early release or parole. Deputy District Attorney Paul Hagerman noted that Smith's cooperation was vital to securing convictions in what was an incredibly complex case. With that, the murder case of young Dolph is now officially closed. Now, let's talk about WAC 100, because this piece of the puzzle shows you exactly how far this federal conversation has traveled. WAC 100, manager of the game and Blueface, and one of the most connected figures at the intersection of the streets and the music industry, jumped on Clubhouse right after Justin Johnson's conviction in late September 2024 to address Yo Gotti directly. Not through subtweets, not through coded language, but completely directly. Yo Gotti, say your prayers. On West Side, you better say your prayers. That is a direct quote from WAC on Clubhouse. He then broke down his reasoning with devastating logic. He pointed to the testimony that CMG allegedly paid Smith's $50,000 attorney fee. He pointed to Big Juke being an executive of that company, and he pointed to Juke being Gotti's brother. From there, he laid out the exact RICO framework that federal prosecutors could use to tie everything together. He explained how prosecutors would likely classify CMG as a gang, suggesting they would pin both the initial Charlotte shooting and the eventual murder into a broader pattern of racketeering and enterprise violence. WAC wasn't just speculating wildly here. He was applying basic RICO logic to publicly established facts. And that is what makes WAC saying this so significant. This is a man who does not go out of his way to publicly warn people he doesn't respect or individuals he thinks are irrelevant. He singled out Gotti specifically. He addressed him on a platform where thousands of industry insiders were listening. The fact that he chose to say this publicly instead of sending a private message shows that this information has already spread too far to be quietly contained. When someone with deep connections and inside positioning broadcasts federal scrutiny on a live audio platform, it means Gotti's name is already being discussed in rooms he isn't even in. It means people are already calculating their own exposure. And that is exactly when cooperators emerge. That is when the walls truly start closing in. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because this goes way beyond a single beef, a single murder, or a single courtroom. The federal lens currently examining Gotti's operation needs to be understood in the context of what federal prosecutors have been doing to the music industry lately. Look at the YSL RICO case in Atlanta that took down Young Thug's entire organization. Look at the federal prosecutor's pattern of using criminal enterprise frameworks to target record labels whenever evidence suggests the label was funding or facilitating violence. These are not isolated events. This is a deliberate, strategic federal approach to dismantling groups they classify as gangs operating under the guise of music businesses. CMG is one of the most commercially successful independent rap labels in the country, generating hundreds of millions in legitimate revenue. Moneybagg Yo is one of the biggest artists alive right now. The label has real business, real infrastructure, and major industry relationships. But here is what the feds do not care about. They do not care how legitimate your business looks on the surface if they can prove that the enterprise also functioned as a vehicle for violence. If they can tie the head of the label to the criminal activity surrounding it, that is the RICO threat in its purest form. It is not just about what you did yourself. It is about what the enterprise did as a whole, and whether you directed it or benefited from it. The attorney fee allegation alone, the claim that CMG funds were used to pay for the legal defense of one of Young Dolph's killers, is exactly the kind of thread federal investigators pull until the entire sweater unravels. Because if you funded the defense of a hitman who killed someone as part of an enterprise conflict, you have potentially made yourself a participant in covering up that enterprise's violent actions. This is no longer just a standard murder case. This is a federal case. Let me break down exactly what the specific pressure points look like right now. First, both shooters have now been dealt with. Justin Johnson is serving life plus 35 years, while Cornelius Smith received a 20-year sentence. Both of them cooperated at various levels. Crucially, the question of who ordered the hit was answered under oath. Big Juke, Yo Gotti's brother. That testimony is now a permanent part of the legal record. Federal investigators do not need to reprove what has already been proven in state court. They build on top of it. Second, the fact that Big Juke is dead actually creates complications that cut both ways. He cannot cooperate and he cannot be charged, but he also cannot manage his own narrative. Every single person who was around him, who had conversations with him about Dolph, or who was present when decisions were being made, those people are still alive. And federal investigators are incredibly skilled at tracking those individuals down and giving them very compelling reasons to talk. Third, look at the attorney fee allegation. If federal prosecutors can follow the paper trail from CMG to Cornelius Smith's legal defense, they will have a documented financial connection between Gotti's enterprise and the people who executed the murder. That is exactly the kind of financial thread that RICO cases are built on. Fourth, you have to consider the ongoing violence in Memphis since Dolph's death. Big Juke himself was killed in January 2024, and the streets of Memphis have continued to see violence tied to these exact dynamics. Every single incident generates new evidence, new witnesses, new phone records, and new surveillance footage. The federal investigation into this situation isn't just one isolated case. It is a constellation of interconnected events, all pointing back toward the same enterprise. The real kicker, though, and what makes Gotti's situation fundamentally different from where it was even 2 years ago, is that the state case is now completely wrapped up. Every defendant has been sentenced or acquitted. That courtroom chapter is officially closed. But what happened in those courtrooms does not simply disappear when the gavel falls. It becomes a foundation. Federal prosecutors can take everything that came out in state court, every piece of testimony, every financial allegation, and every established connection, and use it as a roadmap to build a federal case that goes much deeper and wider than anything Memphis handled locally. Gotti has been noticeably more careful since all of this unfolded. He has positioned himself strictly as the executive, the label boss, and the legitimate businessman. CMG has kept releasing music, kept generating revenue, and maintained its strong position in the industry. On paper, everything looks like a thriving company. But federal prosecutors are not just looking at paper. They are looking at what happened on Airways Boulevard. They are looking at what came out under oath in a Shelby County courtroom, and what the financial trails between CMG and the people convicted of murder look like when you follow them all the way to the source. For the artists signed to CMG, like Moneybagg Yo and the rest of the roster who are out here grinding and building their own legacies, the uncertainty of what a federal investigation means for the enterprise they are attached to is very real. It is exactly what happened to Young Thug's artists when YSL became a federal case. An investigation like this disrupts everything it touches, regardless of individual guilt. At the end of the day, The story of Yo Gotti and Young Dolph isn't just a rap beef that turned deadly. It is about what happens when the codes of the streets and the ambitions of the boardroom exist in the same world, enforced by the same people with the same violent consequences. Young Dolph paid the ultimate price for refusing to compromise his independence. He survived 100 shots. He survived LA. He kept making music, kept feeding his community, and kept flying his flag. And when they finally took him, they took something from Memphis that can never be replaced. But here is what is different about where we are right now. The case is officially closed on the street level, and every shooter has been dealt with. However, what was alleged in those courtrooms about who ordered the hit, where the money came from, and what CMG's role was in all of it, that isn't going away. That is permanently in the record. And the federal government, which is patient, methodical, and rarely misses, has access to every single word of it. WAC 100 said it best: say your prayers. The streets know what they know. The courtrooms have already spoken about who allegedly gave the order and who allegedly paid the bills. The only question left is whether the feds decide to pick up where Memphis left the case and build something that goes all the way to the top. Memphis will be watching, the industry will be watching, and so will we. What are your thoughts on where this goes from here now that the local murder case is officially closed? Drop them in the comments below. And if you want the full breakdown of the CMG versus Paper Route Empire war from the very beginning, tap into the video on screen right now. We go all the way back to where it started. We'll see y'all in the next one.